Hello. Let me get the URLs. Act does quite a bit of anti-capitalist stuff. Alright, volume sounded okay. Here are the URLs for the book. Mises one and Kindle one. Yeah, the book I'm reading is The Real Right to Medical Care versus Socialized Medicine by George Reisman. Oh, the bot showed up. Alright. So, the previous video... Oh, I'll link the previous video too. This is the previous video. It is currently censored by YouTube. However, it should be unblocked in approximately 24 hours because the music people have 48 hours to do something or it gets unblocked. Then they also have 30 days to respond, but they only have 2 days for it to stay blocked. So if they want it to stay blocked, they have to be quick or it gets unblocked until they respond. Anyway, I should just win the fair use because they have no case whatsoever. Okay, so we're now continuing with more of the book. Kind of tired, so I might not finish, but we'll see how it goes.
5. The high price of patented prescription drugs. The perverted notion of the need-based right to medical care and the collectivization of medical costs to finance it help to explain the very high prices of patented prescription drugs, the prices of goods enjoying patent or copyright protection, or which are produced by means of a unique, secret technology, that is, the prices of goods whose sellers need not fear direct competition, are set with regard to what economists call the elasticity of demand. This is a measure of the extent to which charging a higher price results in a reduction in the quantity of the good that people are prepared to buy. Sellers of such goods do not want to set the price so high that the reduction in sales volume outweighs the rise in price. The resulting reduction in sales volume always operates as a limit on the price it pays to charge. When possible, sellers in this situation set a price or prices that are low enough to enable them to achieve substantial sales volume. This entails price discrimination, that is, charging different prices for the same or substantially the same good to buyers in different parts of the market, a higher price or higher price version in the high income end of the market and one or more lower prices or lower price versions in the lower income segments of the market. It follows that to the extent that the market...
Alright, so what was that about? Patented prescription drugs have a high price. Right, so they're saying when you have when you have a monopoly due to a patent, then you can set the price without worrying about competition. All you have to worry about is will people still buy it if I raise the price, or will they use substitute goods? And when people are price insensitive and you have a monopoly, then you're going to raise the price really high. And people are price insensitive because of the material in the previous sections about how the group pays for their medical care, so they pay only a very small portion of it themselves, so they don't care what the price is.
It follows that to the extent that the market comes to be made up of buyers for whom price is no object because they are covered by today's private medical insurance companies or by government programs, the price that it is profitable to charge is correspondingly increased. This is because to that extent, the higher price does not operate to reduce the quantity of the drug demanded. Thus, the incentive is created to charge a higher price. At the same time, various prohibitions against price discrimination.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. They raise the price, the quantity demanded doesn't go down, they make more money. Because the patent prevents competition, and the collective medicine buy-in prevents caring about the price. People don't care if the price is high because other people pay almost all of it.
At the same time, various prohibitions against price discrimination serve to prevent the offering of lower prices or lower price versions to those who lack insurance and are outside of the government programs. Today, if a drug company offered a lower price or lower price version to anyone, the government and many or most of the private insurance companies would almost certainly demand that they too obtain the benefit of the lower price or lower price version. Thus, the offering of a lower price or lower price version to any segment of the market does not pay, and the result is that everyone is confronted with artificially higher drug prices. These observations, made with respect to the domestic market of the United States, are confirmed by the recent furor caused by newspaper reports of the availability of lower drug prices in Mexico. The fact that I have stressed the role of the alleged need-based right to medical care in raising drug prices should not be understood as minimizing the role played by arbitrary FDI regulations that delay and inhibit the introduction of new drugs. These are responsible for the average new drug that is introduced having a development cost and thus minimum price far in excess of what market conditions require. 6.
You might think that the FDA delays and inhibits the introduction of new drugs to protect you and to help you, and that they do this in a competent, reasonable way. If you believe that, you are incorrect. One of the things I understand about the FDA is they have a 2 positive studies rule. Run as many studies as you want, and if 2 of them get a positive result, then your drug gets approved, looks like it works. So you can have 2 out of 100 studies work with 95% confidence, and they'll call that good enough. That's the short version. It's completely ridiculous. There are a lot of other things wrong with the FDA. If you research it, I think you'll be disappointed.
6. Wasteful expenditures by hospitals. The perverted notion of the need-based right to medical care and the collectivization of medical costs to finance it are also responsible for the phenomenon of hospitals being able to waste vast sums of money in the purchase of costly equipment from which they derive relatively little use. In any other industry, if companies buy expensive equipment that they use insufficiently, they lose money, or at least make less money than they could have made. Buyers of their products are not willing to reimburse them for their wasteful expenditures. As a result, they try to avoid the practice and quickly stop if they make such a mistake. But when the buyer is a nonprofit collective, such as Medicare, with unlimited access to the resources of the taxpayers via the U.S. Treasury, and pays according to the seller's costs, in this case, the hospital's costs, whatever those costs may be, then there is no reason for the sellers to limit their expenditures. The same result exists if private, for-profit buyers are legally obliged to pay rates that cover the seller's costs, whatever those costs may be, which is the position that the private medical insurance companies have been in relation to hospitals.
Well, that sucks. So the hospital spends as much as they want, and then people are forced to pay it. So it takes away their incentive to economize. It's kind of like cost-plus contracts with military contractors. When the government says, we'll pay your costs plus 10%, then you make a larger profit if you have higher costs. You don't have an incentive to economize?
The government's response in such circumstances is to take control of the expenditures the sellers are allowed to make. This is why hospitals in many states are now required to have a so-called certificate of need from the government before being allowed to make any significant-sized equipment purchase. The situation is analogous to what prevails in the case of farm subsidies. There the government has obligated itself to buy farmers' crops at an artificially high price. In order to limit its expenses, it controls the amount of acreage the farmers are allowed to plant, or requires that they possess a license to grow the crop. It should be realized that the government can also be motivated to impose restrictions on hospitals' purchases of equipment, even in conditions in which the purchases are entirely necessary and appropriate. To the extent that the hospital's patients are served for free, at the government's expense, the restrictions on the purchases appear from the government's perspective simply as a saving of cost, that is, as a saving of cost unaccompanied by any reduction in revenue. The patients are worse off, but from the government's perspective all that happens is that its cost is less. 7.
So that also really sucks. Once the government screws things up and creates a bad situation where they're going to get exploited and taken advantage of because of the incentive systems, where the incentives do not cause people to do what the government would like them to do, like economize on medical equipment, then the government says, oh, you're abusing the system, and starts making rules. So the first rules cause the problem, and then they make rules to try to deal with some of the problems caused by the first rules. They stack more rules on top of the previous rules. These new rules cause new problems. They partially solve some of the previous problems, which could have been better solved with freedom. But then they also cause additional problems, sometimes resulting in a third set of rules, which cause further problems, resulting in a fourth set of rules, which cause further problems, and so on. And the new rules always cause further problems. You're never going to have these like detailed, intrusive regulations with no downsides. So in this case, the government just controls what hospitals can buy, just like they do with farms, to prevent costs from being too high, which prevents patients from getting some care and stuff that they could have otherwise gotten. That's awful. People die because of this. Like, it's important to bring it back to what's happening in reality. This is literally killing people. Bad economics and political philosophy lead to death. like in a lot of death, not a little bit. And this was explained approximately 25 years ago by one of the world's best economists. And he explained it in detail with, logical reasoning, laid it out. And did anyone listen? Did we fix it? No. Did someone refute his arguments? Was there a rebuttal? Were there counter arguments? No. So his arguments went unanswered and unheeded. And this is common, but it's a really broken system where there's no process by which rational arguments actually get used in the world. There are some processes where sometimes that happens, but they're not very reliable. And they're hard to access. A lot of access to them is gated by high social status, and Reisman does not have the public reputation to be listened to, which is not based on how good his arguments are, how good his reasoning is. It's based on sort of a popularity contest, social dynamics, social climbing, networking, making friends with people in high places, going to Yale, stuff like that, which is a really bad system. That's not truth-seeking. For more on that, read my essays on Paths Forward. So at fallibleideas.com/pathsforward. This is one of the essays. And then at the bottom, I link to more material. And it covers sort of what's wrong with the world and how intellectuals should be more rational so that rational arguments can actually make more of a difference in the world. Because it's a big problem.
7. Inadequate Medicare payments and cost shifting. The perverted notion of the need-based right to medical care and the collectivization of medical costs to finance it are also responsible in the last analysis for the rise in medical costs that takes place as a result of the practice adopted by many state governments of keeping their schedule of allowable Medicaid charges substantially below the prevailing market level. This is a practice which, like that of requiring certificates of need, has been adopted for the purpose of controlling federally mandated state government expenditures under the Medicaid program. It is a practice which has led to many physicians refusing to accept Medicaid patients because of inadequate compensation. In the case of hospitals, which cannot refuse to accept Medicaid patients when they appear in the emergency room, the result has been a correspondingly greater rise in the cost charged both to private medical insurance companies and to the federal government under the Medicare program. The process is known as cost shifting. That is, to the extent that the hospital's costs are not reimbursed by the Medicaid program, they are shifted in the form of higher charges to patients covered by private insurance companies or the Medicare program. Private patients who are not insured are also confronted with higher charges on account of this shifting of costs. Since the mid-1980s, when the Medicare program adopted the policy of payment according to diagnostic-related groups, DRGs, cost shifting has intensified. Now Medicare payments also frequently turn out to be inadequate to cover the cost of treatment. This inadequacy is added to the insufficiency of Medicaid payments. The inadequacy is further compounded to the extent that private insurance companies have adopted the DRG standards of payment. The total, combined shortfall is then passed along to the remaining patients, above all, the uninsured. 8. Rise in admit.
So as long as there's people who aren't in the collective system, costs keep being pushed to them to try to make up the shortfalls. And once everyone's in the collective system, the only thing that can happen is quality of care can go down until it makes the system sort of work. Because there just isn't enough money for everything everyone wants. And not enough willing to pay. People don't want a tax rate of 90% to pay for more medicine, so screw other people as long as you can get away with it, and then eventually just have worse medical care and die.
8. Rise in administrative costs. As we have seen repeatedly, the effect of the alleged need-based right to medical care and the collectivization of costs to finance it is to make the cost of medical care rise beyond all bounds. But as the last 2 points of discussion indicate, sooner or later the continuous rise in medical costs encounters resistance, not from the great majority of individual citizens to whom everything still appears to be free, but from the officials of the collectives that must meet the ever-rising charges. Thus, in an effort to limit the rise in costs, more and more bureaucratic controls are introduced by all the various collectives that must pay the cost. Under the controls, the insurance companies and the government agencies administering the Medicare and Medicaid programs must be kept advised of every step of the treatment of each of the patients insured or covered by them. A mountain of paperwork develops. The filing of all the various bureaucratic forms is inevitably accompanied by frequent haggling back and forth on a case-by-case basis between physicians and hospitals, on the one side, and the insurance companies and federal and state governments, on the other. The inevitable further result is another major source of higher medical costs, namely, a sharp rise in administrative costs. While the rise in administrative costs is less than the altogether boundless rise in costs that would otherwise take place, it is nonetheless very substantial in its own right, and represents a further loss to the general public that must be charged to the perverted notion of the need-based right to medical care. Or rather, a related aspect of the collective's attempt to control costs is the apparent practice of some private insurance companies of losing many of the insurance claims submitted to them, or of suddenly finding the need for additional, often irrelevant information. These are ruses designed to postpone payment and thus reduce the pressure of cost increases outstripping rate increases. This, of course, adds further to administrative costs by making the physicians, hospitals, and clinics who are claimants go to the trouble of repeatedly refiling or amending their claims. In addition to everything that can be traced specifically to the perversion of the right to medical care, there is the impact on the cost of medical care of government regulation in general, alleged safety regulations, environmental regulations, labor regulations, and so on all add more or less substantially to the cost of medical care, as they do to the cost of everything else. Probably, they have added more to the cost of medical care than to the cost of most other things because of the lack of buy-resistance that the perverted notion of the need-based right to medical care engenders in the field. For example, the resistance to the employment of unnecessary workers in connection with union feather-bedding practices is certain to be less in hospitals to the extent that the hospitals know they can pass the extra cost onto the insurance companies or to the government.
Alright, what's feather bedding? Requires an employer to increase labor costs, such as by hiring more workers needed than are necessary for the task. So, okay, yeah, so there's less incentive to economize again. And yeah, all of these problems result in higher administrative costs, which are not as bad as having no administration and just everything gets exploited without limit, but it's still a huge problem.
Thus, in all of these ways, the perverted notion of the need-based right to medical care, that is, an alleged right to medical care with or without the consent of those who are to pay for it or provide it, that is, an alleged right to medical care as entailing a right to steal and enslave, has progressively raised the cost of medical care, and it alone is responsible for the crisis of the ever-rising cost of medical care. At the same time, as the corollary of its destructiveness, this perverted notion of the right to medical care has systematically undermined the actual, rational right to medical care. This cannot be stressed too strongly. In each and every instance in which it has raised the cost of medical care, as explained under the 8 points I have listed, it has represented a case in which individuals who could have afforded to buy medical care from willing providers have been prevented from doing so by the initiation of physical force. In other words, therefore, it is the government's violation of the actual, rational right to medical care that is equally responsible for the crisis in medical care. In view of all this, it is difficult to decide which is the more astonishing, the utter ignorance of all of the above facts. Mrs. Clinton revealed in her declaration that, on psychological as well as economic grounds, some form of discipline, i.e., price controls, in a marketplace that, frankly, has had none, seems to us a feature that needs to be there as a backup, or the fact that Mrs. Clinton has somehow managed to acquire the reputation of being an expert on the subject she has been spending so much time speaking about lately. It should be obvious to anyone who can understand even the barest essentials of economic theory that the cause of the crisis in medical costs is precisely the philosophy of collectivism and government interference Mrs. Clinton advocates and now wants to extend further. Mrs. Clinton's statement appeared in the Orange County Register, October 10, 1993.
Yeah, well, Clinton is a propagandist, not a thinker. She's not an honest person. But she has friends in high places and stuff.
3. The Clinton Plan. The Clinton Plan seeks to solve the problems created by government interference with medicine up to now by adding further, even more destructive government interference with medicine, while the effect of the government's violation and or perversion of the individual's actual, rational right to medical care, namely, his right to buy it from willing providers.
Hillary Clinton is also a criminal, by the way. Not just for the new stuff in the 2016 election, but for older stuff as well. There's a really good book on it. Yeah, so this is focused more on Bill Clinton, but it does have some Hillary stuff. And I thought this book was very good. It was very scholarly and researched in a lot of detail and stuff. More so than some of her later books. Less jokes and stuff. That's not really an insult against her later books, but in some ways I thought this one was better. And there are people who do not like some things about her later books who would like this one. Although most of the people who complain about her books have not actually read them. Or, they just go by reputation, because some people, hear that she's evil and don't actually know anything about her work. There's also that Clinton money book. What is it, like Clinton Cash? Yeah, so I read this one too. This one was okay. Yeah, so this is a decent book too, with more stuff Clinton did wrong.
3. The Clinton Plan. The Clinton plan seeks to solve
the... Where was I? I was this far, I think.
While the effect of the government's violation and or perversion of the individual's actual, rational right to medical care, namely, his right to buy it from willing providers, has thus far been more and more to restrict that right and to undermine its value by making it more and more expensive to exercise, the Clinton plan would destroy the rational right to medical care altogether. It would substitute for the present, very bad situation, characterized by a semi-private room in a hospital costing $1,000 to $1,500 a day, the much worse situation in which the medical care one seeks and is willing and able to pay for cannot be obtained at all, because the government refuses to allow those who would provide it to do so. The Clinton plan seeks nothing less than to deprive the citizen of his essential right to use the offer of money as the means of obtaining the medical care he wants, and instead to make him dependent on the medical care the government is willing to allow him to have. Inasmuch as we...
Yeah, that's really nasty when you can't just buy what you want and you have to take whatever the government rations for you. And if you and the government disagree about how much you should have, you can't solve that problem by working for it to support your life the way you want. Like, imagine if the government decided how many computer devices you should have, whether you should have like an iPhone or an Android, and how old of one is okay, and stuff like that. And whether you need a desktop computer or not, or a laptop, or both, or neither. And if you disagreed with the government about what computing devices you needed, you could like fill out a form and hope, but you couldn't just work for it and buy what you wanted. That would be so terrible. That would like ruin my life. And having that kind of thing in healthcare could also ruin my life. That is a thing that might happen in a very literal way.
Inasmuch as we have had essential features of socialized medicine for many years, the Clinton plan should not be thought of as representing the inauguration of socialized medicine in the United States. It should, however, be thought of as representing a more extreme, fuller-bodied, and uglier form of socialized medicine than we have had thus far. It should be thought of, in effect, as socialized medicine discarding the ballerina shoes it has been parading around in up to now and replacing them with a pair of hobnail boots, as taking off the velvet glove and revealing the mailed fist. Up to now, under the perverted notion of the need-based right to medical care and the collectivization of costs to pay for it, the government has essentially allowed individuals to obtain as much medical care as they and their physicians have deemed necessary or appropriate. Under the Clinton plan, the government, through a National Health Board, will henceforth decide what medical care is to be provided and by what methods. Through a set of quasi-public bodies known as regional alliances, the government will determine what it pays for medical care. These alliances are to negotiate with insurance companies, which henceforth are to be the providers of medical care, in the manner of present-day health maintenance organizations such as Kaiser Permanente or Cigna. Every American citizen is to be compelled to join a government-approved insurance plan. All the plans will offer a uniform set of medical benefits and operate under the guidance of the National Health Board. Funding for the plans is to come mainly from the present-day employer-financed health insurance premiums. The so-called regional alliances are, in effect, to tax away these premium payments and use them themselves to pay the insurance companies. Large corporations, those with more than 5,000 employees, may constitute themselves as corporate alliances and deal with the insurance companies directly, as they do now. The essential purpose of the Clinton plan is to reduce spending for medical care in the United States at the same time that it brings 37 million presently uninsured individuals under the umbrella of the alleged need-based right to medical care. Thus, 37 million additional individuals are to be placed in a position in which medical care will appear to be free. I must digress to point out that a significant number of these individuals will also become unemployed, as their employers, who until now have not paid health insurance premiums, are compelled to pay a major new and additional employment cost in the form of a medical payroll tax that the regional alliances will collect on these individuals' alleged behalf. The results must be the same as those produced by a rise in the minimum wage or in union scales, namely, a reduction in the quantity of labor demanded and thus unemployment.
Right, if you force an employer to pay for someone's medical care, then they might not keep that employee around. They also might lower their wages. It's hard to lower people's wages, though, so some of them will just end up fired. And some of them, the wages would have to be lowered below minimum wage when you consider the real cost of employing them. The minimum is minimum wage plus the medical care costs. And other stuff as well, like if you employ someone, you have to pay half of their Social Security taxes.
The quantity of medical care demanded will rise in accordance with this enlargement of the number of those eligible to receive it as an alleged need-based right. At the same time, financing to meet the demand for medical care is to be reduced. Indeed, the Clinton plan aims to reduce spending for medical care on behalf of those presently covered by employer-financed health insurance plans to such an extent that when the savings from the medical insurance premiums are...
So, stuff is overpriced, but reducing spending will not fix the prices. It will just mean less medical care is provided. You'll be providing less of the expensive care. If you want to solve the problem, you have to figure out what is causing the prices to be high, as Reisman has explained. And then you have to figure out, all right, what can we change to make the prices go down? Which the Clinton plan is not doing.
Employer-financed health insurance plans to such an extent that when the savings from the medical insurance premiums are paid over to the employees as additional wages, the federal government's tax collections on the wage earners will go up by $51 billion. New York Times, September 21, 1993, p. A13. If you realize that the extra federal taxes the workers will pay are on the order of 25% of their additional incomes, the implication is that the Clinton plan contemplates slashing something on the order of $200 billion or more from medical spending on behalf of today's insured wage earners. It should be
I missed a couple details there. Oh, okay. So they want to reduce medical spending by 200 billion, resulting in an extra 50 billion of taxes because the people are actually able to get paid that money instead of having it taken out of their paycheck to cover medical stuff. So they're going to dramatically reduce the budget and add a bunch of people to the pool, and somehow that's supposed to help.
It should be obvious that under such conditions, no other outcome is possible but shortages and rationing, for there will be a vast increase in the quantity of medical care demanded and, at the same time, a major decrease in the financial resources made available to meet the demand. Doctors' offices.
Yeah, that. Goldratt is great at all stages. I don't know why you don't think he's good at early stage.
Doctors' offices will fill up. Long waiting lists will develop for practically every type of medical procedure. As in Canada today, more people will die on the waiting list for heart surgery than on the operating table. See Imprimis, November 1993, p. 3. The more expensive kinds of procedures will be performed much less frequently, if at all, and their place will be taken by lower cost, less reliable or less effective alternatives, as every provider of medical care is placed on a limited budget and obliged to treat the collectivity of his patients within the limits of that budget. In this connection, no one should be fooled by the fact that the Clinton plan promises the continued existence of traditional fee-for-service medical practitioner and
I got distracted. macOS Catalina changed the zoom in feature. So it wasn't so it wasn't working how I wanted. Let's just do that.
Doctors' offices will fill up. Long waiting lists will develop for practically every type of medical procedure. As in Canada today, more people will die on the waiting list for heart surgery than on the operating table. See Imprimis, November 1993, p. 3. The more expensive kinds of procedures will be performed much less frequently, if at all, and their place will be taken by lower cost, less reliable or less effective alternatives, as every provider of medical care is placed on a limited budget and obliged to treat the collectivity of his patients within the limits of that budget. In this connection, no one should be fooled by the fact that the Clinton plan promises the continued existence of traditional fee-for-service medical practitioner and free choice among them. They too will be placed on strict budgets and their methods of treatment closely monitored and controlled by the government in its efforts to limit expenditures for medical care. No one should imagine that the additional $1,140 per year or less that this variant of medical insurance is to be allowed to cost under the Clinton plan will enable anyone to obtain significantly more medical care than the member of the typical HMO type scheme that is envisaged, and even the allegedly continued legal right to choose one's physician will be lost once the demand for his services comes to exceed his ability to render them and he is prevented from restoring balance between demand and supply because he is prohibited from raising his rates or raising them sufficiently to do so. In follow.
Right, so if he can't set his rate high enough to get his supply of labor and the demand for his labor in balance, then you're not going to be able to get his services by bidding enough money. So you'll have to rely on his good graces, his favors. He'll pick and choose favorites, and you might lose your physician. As far as the general issue, one of the things this article is not covering that I think is really important is a misconception a lot of people have. I've talked to people who have this misconception really strongly. They're completely blind to the issue. And their misconception is they don't understand that there are different qualities of healthcare, that there are lower cost, less reliable, or less effective alternatives. They don't know that's a thing. They just think healthcare is healthcare. They don't understand there's quality variations. They can't come up with examples. They don't understand it. They just think everyone should have the healthcare they need, and they don't understand all this stuff like people demanding more healthcare because they don't have to pay for it. They think, well, no one wants extra healthcare. You just get enough healthcare to get better, and then you're done. What do you need extra for? So they don't think anyone will like misuse extra healthcare. They don't understand that quality can be cut, other than just like denying people necessary services, which of course they're opposed to. Regarding Goldratt, just all his stuff, his philosophy, his approach to business, it just helps you think better about how to run a business and how to organize it and what to do and so on. Like, I particularly recommend his novels, I guess, all of those, as well as The Choice, but that one's a little more philosophical, a little less directly business related. You can also hire me for consulting, by the way.
In following the less expensive medical procedures, the physician will be legally safe, irrespective of the effect on the individual patient, so long as his treatment is within the parameters of appropriate treatment to be set forth in detail in various practice guidelines that are currently in preparation by the government. These practice guidelines will be the bureaucratic rule books that, when strictly followed, will be the physician's protection against a charge that he failed to do as much as he might have done for the health of his patients. At the same time, it will be against the law for patients to offer physician.
So in essence, while there is a wide variety of possible medical treatments for a particular situation, the government will get rid of that. They will make practice guidelines. They will say, this is what you do in this situation, and then there will be no more judgment of doctors. They will just follow the practice guidelines. If they do extra, they'll be wasting money and not get paid for it. If they do less, they'll get in trouble. So they just have to do exactly what they're told, which will be evil and will prevent them from using their minds and thinking. They'll just become automatons following the orders of the government, instead of knowledge workers who actually put thought into how to best help their patients.
Done for the health of his patients. At the same time, it will be against the law for patients to offer physicians or other medical care providers additional fees in order either to get to the head of a waiting list or to secure the more effective but costlier methods of treatment they may require by enabling the providers to go beyond their fixed budgets. Indeed, the Clinton administration's Health Security Preliminary Plan Summary, published by the U.S. Government Printing Office, notes, ominously, that among the plan's provisions are new criminal penalties for healthcare and for the payment of bribes or gratuities to influence the delivery of health services and coverage. P.
So they're just trying to get rid of a market in healthcare so you cannot buy the healthcare you want. And of course, that will create a black market in healthcare, which they will then criminalize and go after, just like in the Soviet Union, there was a black market for food.
Thus, physicians are to be reduced to the level of postal clerks, deterred by the threat of criminal penalties from providing the medical care an individual patient needs and is willing to pay for, and at the same time, by the very same set of facts, the individual patient is to be rendered impotent to secure the medical care he needs and is willing to pay for. This interposition of brute government force between physician and patient, this utter destruction of the real, rational right to medical care, is what the Clinton plan has in store for the American people. As I have already said, what is present here is an attempt to deprive the citizen of his essential right to use the offer of money as the means of obtaining the medical care he wants, and instead to make him dependent on the medical care the government is willing to allow him to have. Such a situation represents a government gun aimed at the heads of the citizens, preventing them from securing their health and their lives by the exercise of their own free judgment and that of their freely chosen physicians.
By the way, this reminds me, because George Reisman is an objectivist, and I'm pretty sure he was anti-Hillary Clinton and, comparatively pro-Trump, even though Trump's not perfect, in the latest election. By contrast, Peikoff and ARI and Harry Binswanger and stuff were kind of overly anti-Trump and pro-Hillary. I forget all the details, but there's a decent amount of that kind of attitude going around. I think some of them were just openly pro-Hillary. And, this Clinton plan stuff, it's so evil and so anti-objectivist. What has Trump ever done that's as bad as this? Like, what is wrong with those people?
Despite these facts, President Clinton claims that his plan will preserve individual choice and provide medical care that is as good or better than that now provided, but will do so for everyone in the United States, and will do so for less money than is now spent for medical care. Whenever anyone hears these claims, he should remember the claim this same gentleman repeatedly made before his election, that he would enact a tax cut for the middle class. These latest claims of his have even less to do with reality. Among the areas of medical care likely to suffer the most under the Clinton plan are those which represent a leading edge of medical technology. Of necessity, these almost always begin with a relatively high cost. In addition,
Promising a tax cut for the middle class is just straight bribing the voters. It's just like, I wonder where there's a bunch of voters. Oh, there's a lot of people in the middle class. Well, we're going to make everything great for them. That's a promise. So vote for me. It gets really bad in democracy when people start trying to bribe groups of voters rather than offer plans they think are objectively good for the country. When you just split people up into interest groups and start handing out favors to get as many interest groups on your side as possible to form a coalition, then you screw over the people who aren't part of your coalition, who you're not bribing. Of course, everyone's worse off overall. Like, the total pie is smaller, and then some of the people you're bribing so they're not so bad off, and then others you're not bribing so they're like really screwed. It's a terrible system.
Among the areas of medical care likely to suffer the most under the Clinton plan are those which represent a leading edge of medical technology. Of necessity, these almost always begin with a relatively high cost. In addition, their full importance and range of application is often not seen for some time. A system dominated by bureaucratic routiness is not conducive to their encouragement, even apart from the fact that their introduction under the perverted notion of the need-based right to medical care operates, as we have seen, sharply to increase spending for medical care, which is the very thing the government wants to avoid. Thus, it is not accidental that, in its efforts to control medical expenditures, the Clinton plan makes virtually no provision for the introduction of major new medical technologies. The plan's contemplated restrictions on the profitability of new drugs will also strongly operate against progress in medical technology. Another leading candidate for cutbacks in medical care are the aged. The cost of treating them is high, and their remaining years as taxpayers are few, if any. It is not accidental that in Great Britain, for example, it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, for people over the age of 55 to obtain coronary artery bypass operations, and that elderly people with a broken hip are likely to die before they reach the top of the waiting list for such operations. Even the Clinton plan's much vaunted goal.
Oh, Wayne Agony. You can also ask about startup stuff on FI if you want to. You can just start a thread to discuss something.
Even the Clinton plan's much vaunted goal of reducing administrative costs will not result in any genuine saving. The administrative costs under the present system are not accidental. They are necessitated by the need to deal with the mountains of claims made on the system by patients and practitioners proceeding under the perverted notion of the need-based right to medical care and who are attempting to collect their due under that alleged right. Any administrative cost savings that will be achieved will be of the character of the post office or motor vehicle department not having enough clerks to serve the lines of waiting customers, or of the practice of various government agencies of not answering their telephones. Moreover, any such cost savings will almost certainly be dwarfed by the enormous additional cost of having to deal with the claims of the 37 million presently uninsured individuals who are to be brought into the system by the Clinton plan. As to the claim that the Clinton plan fosters competition, which will operate to reduce the cost of medical care, one need only bear in mind that what the Clinton plan envisages as competition is managed competition, an oxymoron if ever there was one. The meaning of managed competition, i.e., competition controlled by the government, is precisely that there is no freedom of competition. What is admitted into the market is only what the government wishes to allow. The actual description of such a situation is monopoly, that is, presence in the market is made a matter of the grant of government privilege. The market is reserved to the exclusive possession of those the government wishes to allow to be in the market, while all others are excluded by means of the government's threat to fine or imprison them, that is, by its threat to initiate the use of physical force against them. Under the Clinton plan, the decision of which insurance companies will be allowed in any given market will be made by the quasi-governmental regional alliances. Thus, the competition the Clinton plan envisages is competition among providers operating within its guidelines of medical treatment and to the satisfaction of its regional alliances. The medical insurance companies are to compete in delivering medical care at the lowest cost within these parameters. Individual citizens are then to choose among the medical insurance companies allowed to compete by the regional alliances.
So it's not competition to satisfy the patients who are not the customers and do not have much choice over what medical care they get and don't get to pay for it. In general, whoever's actually paying for stuff is the person who gets pleased or satisfied in some way, to some extent. So when the patients stop paying, they stop getting served very well. General rule of thumb. I've not seen Joker. Is that like a new Batman movie? Not a big fan of those.
In the framework of this kind of competition, that is, monopoly, the operation of the profit motive is likely to turn out to mean the realization of some of the worst nightmares collectivists and socialists have about the effects of the profit motive, for the Clinton plan makes the source of profit nothing other than the withholding of medical care from the sick. An insurance company will be the more profitable, the more consistently its treatment methods conform to the minimum standards allowed by the government's practice guidelines. In fact, the arrangement is nothing less than a formula for near murder. This is because so long as an insurance company both complies with the practice guidelines and turns in an overall performance record that is judged to be statistically satisfactory, it has absolutely no reason to make the substantial additional expenditures that may be necessary in individual cases to save a human life. At the same time, of course, the individual whose life is at stake is prohibited from offering the insurance company or its practitioner additional money of his own to obtain the medical care he requires.
Oh, this is really nasty. So he's saying if a company is following the practice guidelines and their overall record is statistically satisfactory, then if someone's going to die, they're not even going to care. It's not going to make a difference to them. It's not a problem for them. And in fact, they will not be paid more money for saving his life, and he's not allowed to pay to save his life. There's just no money in saving his life from anyone, and there's not allowed to be. I don't watch many movies. I do not like action movies in general. I don't think Batman movies have intellectual content, and I don't find them interesting or whatever. I used to watch some action movies, but I think I got the idea, and now they're boring. And I do not like the Joker. I think he's a nasty character. Very unappealing. I think people who like him have psychological problems. Not necessarily huge ones, but there's something wrong there. I could say that about a lot of things, though, not just the Joker. And also, I don't think Sauzian analysis of the Joker would be interesting or important because he's not a serious character. He has nothing to do with psychiatry. Basically, it's just a fantasy. It's a fiction. It's not even trying to be related to the actual practice of psychiatry in America. Like, it's not serious, and counter-arguments against it aren't going to change anyone's minds or really be relevant.
This monstrous system operates to draw even the individual physician into its deadly game by paying him a flat fee per patient, a so-called capitation fee. It thereby creates an economic incentive for the physician to do as little as possible for the patient, indeed, to have as many patients as possible with as few illnesses as possible. Those are the ways a physician can earn the highest income under the Clinton plan, because in such ways, he receives the same revenue and has the lowest cost. In fact, the kind of medical care that can be expected if the Clinton plan is enacted is less and less actual medical care and more efforts to avoid sickness by promoting so-called wellness, such as through attempts to change patients' lifestyles. The logic of the arrangement implies that what can be expected instead of medical care is hectoring on behalf of the latest health fads concerning diet, exercise, and stress. Indeed,
That is a very good point. That sucks. And he's completely right to say health fads. Like, a lot of the advice that people are going to be pushed into about diet, exercise, and stress is total bullshit with no scientific basis.
Indeed, it is difficult to imagine a worse arrangement than one in which one's well-being and very life are made to depend on the largesse of necessarily indifferent government officials who will pay a given amount on one's behalf to some other set of strangers for one's total medical care and who then pretend that the problem of one's care is provided for, while the individual himself is prevented from going out and offering money for his care, more money for more care, and thereby enlisting the self-interest of others in his care. President Clinton describes his proposed little red, white, and blue card that every American will have to carry as the National Health Security Card. He has said, with this card, if you lose your job or you switch jobs, you're covered. If you leave your job to start a small business, you're covered. If you're an early retiree, you're covered. The card, according to Mr. Clinton, represents the security of insurance you can never lose. New York Times, September 23, 1993, p. 1. The truth is, as the present discussion confirms, that the individual has no security of medical care when he is deprived of his essential right to buy medical care, and his medical care is placed in the hands of the government. Under such conditions, his medical care is as secure as that of a convict.
That's a good comparison, yes. They provide medical care to convicts in jail, but, it's not very good. They don't get to choose what they'll get. You don't want to be in that position. You want freedom and the possibility of shopping around and choosing providers who are competing on the market for your money.
Individual cases and the lives of individuals do not matter to the authors of the Clinton plan. The Clinton plan is founded upon and spurred on by an unchallenged mentality of collectivism and statism, which regards the United States and its people as the property of the government. It is from this perspective that its intellectual supporters and alleged experts complain about the growing percentage of the gross national product that is devoted to medical care and about the deprivation of other, allegedly more important uses for the additional share funds devoted to medical care, such as education. They look upon the income and wealth produced by tens of millions of separate individuals in the United States and properly belonging to those individuals separately and individually, as though it resided in one giant pot, whose disposition was not to be decided by the individuals to whom it belongs, but by the government.
It's kind of weird. They're saying medical care for all, but also they want to reduce medical spending. Like, they want people to have less medical care. I mean, I guess they pretend it'll be more efficient once the government manages it, which doesn't make any sense. The government does not manage things efficiently. That's not its job. It's not what it's good at. The government is like an extra big company. Like, big companies have trouble being efficient. The government is bigger. And the government is also worse in some ways than that. A really good book on the topic is Bureaucracy by Ludwig von Mises, who was the teacher of Reisman. But anyways, it's sort of interesting that they're kind of anti-medical care and they wish people would spend more money on other stuff in some way. But they talk about how great and important medical care is. I still don't think it would be a very good example. People don't want to take movies seriously, and I'm sure there's plenty of fiction to it, and there's plenty of better examples available. Like, you can just go on Reddit and read people's like personal stories that are not designed for a movie audience, and also are not designed for debating the existence of depression, and just hear people talking about their lives, and you could analyze those examples. When they're not on the defensive, they're more honest. And of course, when they're not trying to make hundreds of millions of dollars selling movie tickets, they're more honest. And it's not like they're trying to make those sales by quality or truth or anything. It's much more like the Wynand papers, where they're just pandering to lowbrow tastes.
By the same token, they regard the people of the United States not as separate, free and independent individuals, with the right to make their own, free and independent choices on behalf of their own individual well-being, but, in effect, as human livestock, whose work and wealth, indeed, whose very lives are to be devoted to the fulfillment of the government's plans. Unfailingly, as von Mises recognized long ago in connection with all government interference, each of the alleged intellectuals and experts always assumes that the government will act according to his particular plan and not according to any plan he may not like. In effect, he projects himself upon the lives and destinies of his fellow citizens as though he were the government, or, what is the same thing, the trusted advisor whose advice the government will automatically always follow. In regarding his fellow citizens and their property as the government's property, he implicitly regards them as his property. It is
I'm sure Reisman is correct about this, but it's interesting because I've heard that idea attributed to Hayek, and Mises deserves the credit if he had the idea first. And Reisman would know. Reisman's extremely well read in these kind of issues, so he wouldn't get this wrong.
It is on the basis of their mentality of collectivism and statism that the authors of the Clinton plan seek to impose a system of medical care on the American people that will be determined not by individuals acting for their own self-interest with the help of the best their money can buy, but from on high, by considerations of the nation's medical spending in relation to its gross national product. These considerations, as interpreted and applied by the proposed National Health Board, will extend their tentacles from the nation's capital out into the examining office of every doctor and into every hospital and operating room by means of governmentally imposed fixed budgets and practice guidelines. They will determine the course of treatment that is deemed appropriate in the individual case that stands before the physician or that is to lie before him on the operating table. Thus, the life of the individual patient and the thinking and planning of the physician in the service of the individual patient's life are no longer to be what medicine is about. Instead, it is to be about national priorities and considerations of nationwide medical spending in relation to the gross national product. This is an utter perversion of the art of medicine. It is an utter perversion of what the United States of America and its Constitution and Bill of Rights are about. The founding fathers of the United States did not create this country so that someday a generation of descendants would so debase themselves as to welcome the prospect of living as serfs on a vast, transcontinental feudal estate presided over by President and Mrs. Clinton. With their constant pandering to people's fears of insecurity and their pretended offer of an escape through the abandonment of the remnants of individual freedom in the area of medicine, the Clintons and their propaganda retinue seek to exploit human weakness. They are attempting to lead masses of fearful and ignorant people into a situation of the profoundest danger to their very lives with the siren song that whoever finds facing the world on his own to be too difficult has only to give up the struggle and let the government, the jailer, take care of him. Put yourself in the hands of the government, they say, and then you don't have to worry, you don't have to think about how to provide for your medical needs. The government will do it for you. Never mind that it is precisely the government's taking care of things that has made life in this area so difficult. Just close your eyes and look forward to the security you will have with the little red, white, and blue card. Yes.
That's a really good point, that people are just being, lazy and irresponsible. They don't want to worry about how to take care of themselves, so they just want a guarantee that someone else will take care of them. And, of course, what will really happen is if they no longer take care of themselves, some things are not going to get taken care of.
Yes, I say, learn to close your eyes a little further and you can look forward with pleasurable expectation to all the security you might have if the little red, white, and blue card guaranteed you food, clothing, and shelter, along with medical care. What the Clinton plan is offering is exactly the same kind of illusory security as offered under communism, the security of rightless serfs, which means not security, but miserable poverty and insecurity. Poverty and insecurity are the results in any and every area of life in which the individual loses the right to pursue his own self-interest by means of meeting his needs through buying from willing sellers who are motivated by serving their self-interest. Poverty and insecurity will be the results in medicine if the Clinton plan is enacted.
Other relevant things I remembered. Hillary Clinton is a follower of Saul Alinsky, who I've talked about before. You can read about that on Discover the Networks and in David Horowitz's books like The Shadow Party and the Rules for Radicals pamphlet, something like that. The Shadow Party is mostly about Soros. I think it had Alinsky in it. Maybe I might be forgetting on that one. But there's definitely Alinsky stuff somewhere, including on discoverthenetworks.org. If you look up Alinsky here, you will find that Obama and Hillary were his followers, and a bunch of references to further reading and stuff. See additional resources. Barack Obama's Rules for Revolution, the Alinsky model. And you can find some info about Clinton. And then the other thing is if you go to freeliberalism.com, my site, I have this article on liberalism which explains a lot of ideas related to what we've been reading about, to the general political philosophy concepts, not medical care in particular. Ooh, the free market solution. So that's good.
IV. The free market solution. The actual solution to the problem of runaway medical costs lies in the precise opposite of the direction chosen by the Clinton plan. It is not the final destruction of the individual's rational right to medical care, which is what the Clinton plan would achieve, but the restoration and full implementation of that right, that is, the removal of all government interference that stands between buyers and sellers of medical care or in any way causes medical care to be more expensive than it otherwise would be. In economic terms, the solution is the establishment of a market in medical care that is open to all comers and is dominated by buyers and sellers operating with their own money when acting in their individual self-interest. On the one hand, in such a market, provided that it is free from government interference, the cost of medical care is as low as the prevailing supply of human talent and state of capital accumulation, technology, and competition make it possible to be, and is headed still lower by virtue of further capital accumulation, technological progress, and competition. On the other hand, however, medical care always still has a cost, and the need to take into account costs that come out of one's own pocket automatically eliminates wasteful, uneconomic medical care. Thus, insofar as the market is free, individuals prepare themselves for and enter those particular occupations and industries in which, other things being equal, they can earn the most. In this way, the supply of human talent flows to where the buyers need and want it the most, as demonstrated by their willingness to pay for it the most. If all branches of the market are legally open to all comers, no field in which wages or profits are higher is deprived of talent by virtue of the
About those people I was talking about earlier, who don't understand there's different quality of medical care, essentially they're used to the existence of practice guidelines, and they take for granted that the care prescribed by the practice guidelines is the only possible care. And they just don't understand the concept that there could be alternative care that could be better or worse, more expensive, cheaper, etc. And that there might be reasons for anyone ever to receive something other than the practice guideline care.
want it the most, as demonstrated by their willingness to pay for it the most. If all branches of the market are legally open,
a lot of people object to that, the idea that whoever's willing to pay the most wants it the most. It's not quite that they want it the most, it's that they value it the most in economic terms. They're willing to trade the most value for it. They're willing to pay the doctor the most money for it, so that's beneficial to the doctor to accept that deal. The doctor can't tell who really wants it the most in some sort of subjective, internal, emotional way, but that's not his problem. His problem is to help people in a way with mutual benefit, and if there's more mutual benefit in terms of the benefits to the doctor, that's good for him. More power to him. And that will help fund further medical improvements and so on. Wayne Agony, that is blocked. If you go back to the beginning of the stream, I think it's up at the beginning. Yeah, here. Oh, I didn't link the comment. Okay, look. Go recent comments, YouTube and fair use, scroll down to the bottom. This explains what happened with yesterday's video. It will be back up soon, hopefully. Anyway, there's no good way to determine which person who will not pay the most should get something in general. In particular cases, a doctor might make an exception and say, you know what, this guy really could use the help, I want to help him. Like, he has the right to freely do that. Usually he's not going to. That's completely fine. The way you get the ability to pay a lot is, in a free market, that you help people a lot. So your willingness to pay, as it's related to you having more money. Part of willingness to pay comes from you value it more, so you're willing to pay more of your money. But part of it comes from having a lot of money, which is a consequence of having helped people a lot in the past. You got that money. Every bit of money you get represents some amount that you helped someone. That's how you got it. It was traded to you. Value for value. The people who you got that money from thought that they were getting something worth at least that much or more, because you provided goods or services or something to people. That's where the money came from. You were productive. So you helped others and earned more, social value credits called money, with which you can get your medical care, because you provided more social value than someone else who's bidding less money.
Branches of the market are legally open to all comers. No field in which wages or profits are higher is deprived of talent by virtue of the necessary talent being confined to other fields where wages or profits are lower. Thus, in the case of medical care, everyone tends to enter the field if his talents are more valued in the provision of medical care than in the provision of other services he is capable of rendering. In other words, medical care attracts all the talent it is capable of attracting short of the point of asking individuals to give up more remunerative uses for their abilities in other occupations. This is true both of medical care in general and each of its specific occupations, from nurse's aide to brain surgeon. As a further matter of economic principle, the same freedom of occupation that enables each individual to maximize his income simultaneously serves to minimize the price of all services requiring relatively scarce talents. This is precisely because of the presence in such occupations of the largest possible number of those capable of performing them consistent with their own self-interest. Thus, under the freedom of occupation, the prices of the relatively scarce special talents that are necessary to provide medical care would be as low as they could reasonably be rendered. For example, individuals who are presently compelled to remain as pharmacists but who have the ability to be physicians would be attracted by the higher income of physicians and become physicians. The effect of the larger supply of physicians would be to reduce the fees of physicians. As I have indicated, all this is in sharpest contrast to the conditions that exist under medical licensing. Under those conditions, a more or less considerable portion of the relatively scarce talents required to provide medical care is forcibly denied entry into the field and made to work at lower incomes in other lines. By the same token, the prices of medical services and the incomes derived from their rendition are kept artificially high. For example, the pharmacist with the ability to be a physician is forced to remain as a lower-paid pharmacist, with the result that the fees and incomes of physicians are kept artificially high.
Yeah, so basically some stuff about why free markets are good and help people and make things efficient and all that. It's very true and important, and I already know it.
This is the appropriate place to deal with the rationalization offered in defense of medical licensing, namely, that it is necessary to assure the quality of medical care by imposing high minimum standards for its practitioner. The truth is that the standards imposed by licensing legislation are largely arbitrary and serve to exclude many competent providers from the market and correspondingly to deprive the buyers of their services. As far as medical licensing legislation does achieve any actual elevation of minimum standards of medical care, it is analogous to the effect that would achieve by imposing an arbitrarily high minimum standard for the kinds of automobiles that could be driven on the roads. If such a minimum standard required, for example, that no car could legally be driven that was more than 5 years old, say, there would undoubtedly be some improvement in the quality of the average car on the road. At the same time, a substantial number of perfectly good, usable automobiles would be kept off the roads. Again, the principal victims, of course, would be the poor, who could afford the older cars, but not the newer, more expensive ones.
That kind of thing has actually been done, like cash for clunkers. The government has spent taxpayer money for the purpose of destroying cars so that the poor won't have cars to drive. And then on top of that, they hate Uber and try to suppress Uber so the poor won't be able to get cheap transportation in cars, so that they'll be forced to take buses collectively and slowly, or ride their bikes, because the government hates industry. Not all the time and every way, but a lot of it, it's suppressed. It suppresses people driving around in older cars so that they can take care of themselves and not rely on low-quality government bus services. They suppress Uber so people can't be independent as well. They suppress nuclear power plants to suppress industry. And on and on. They've done this so many times.
It should be realized that as far as any actual guarantees of medical quality are required by means of various forms of certification, a free market is fully capable of providing them. No one would be able to claim the possession of degrees or certificates he had not actually earned. Such action would be fraud and severely punishable. Indeed, the members of the various state medical licensing boards around the country could constitute themselves into private certification agencies and give or withhold their seal of approval to individual medical practitioner on any basis they wished. They would simply lack the power to make the absence of their particular seal of approval the basis of fining or imprisoning anyone who chose to practice medicine without it. The consumers of medical care, who presently retain a right to judge the qualifications of the state governors and legislators who are responsible for the appointment of the members of the medical licensing boards, would decide for themselves the value of certification by this or that organization. They would decide on the basis of considerations analogous to their choice of distinct brands of all kinds of products. Indeed, if ordinary men and women are to be allowed to vote in elections in which their votes ultimately determine the most complex matters of foreign and domestic policy, and thus where their decisions affect not only their own lives and those of their immediate families but also the lives of everyone else in the country, then surely they are entitled to the responsibility of determining matters pertaining exclusively to their own well-being. In reason, it is only if they are capable of doing this that they can be presumed capable of voting on matters that affect others. The mentality underlying licensing is a mentality that holds that government officials do not derive their powers from the governed but are a race of men apart from and above the citizens, men who are intellectually and morally superior to the citizens. Such a mentality has no place in the United States. It should not exist anywhere.
So people will counter-argue and say that it's okay that they get to vote for president because their vote only counts a little bit, but if they got to vote for their medical care, their vote would just win the election, whatever they choose, they get. So they would say something like there's wisdom in crowds, but all the individuals are stupid, but you add up all the stupid individuals and you got some decent wisdom. I don't think this is a good position. but it is a counter argument people will have. I think people will do a lot better job of choosing their medical care than who they vote for because it will have a much larger effect on their life. Their vote will make a much larger difference. And I don't think a few central planners and government bureaucrats will do a better job of choosing medical care for you than you'll do of choosing it for yourself. I think that a bureaucrat would have a hard time doing a better job of choosing your medical care for you if that was his whole job. Because you know what you want better than he does, and you understand your life and your budget and so on better than he does and your priorities. But the actual situation will be that the bureaucrat will be choosing the medical care not just for you, but for a million people or whatever. So it will not be very customized. So I think you'll be able to customize your medical care to your life better than the bureaucrat would. And on top of that, the government or any other health agency would be perfectly allowed to suggest generic medical choices. Here's a list of, if you don't know what medical care to get, here's some good defaults, you'll do okay. So if you want, if you want to follow the government's advice, you voluntarily can, but if you think you can do better, you'll have the freedom to make a go at it. But if you're stupid and incompetent, you're perfectly welcome to follow some impersonal, non-customized advice. You'd also be able to hire an expert. So you might be stupid about medical care, but productive in some way and get a bunch of money, and then you could hire an advisor who's actually good at it to help you figure out what to buy.
As I have shown, in the absence of licensing legislation, a free market operates to optimize the use of human talent and to render the use of relatively scarce talent, such as that required in medicine, as economic as possible. In addition, because a free market is ruled by the profit motive and the freedom of competition, it brings about a combination of improving quality and lower cost of virtually all products and services, including medical care. It does so by making it especially profitable to introduce improvements in quality and efficiency. Competition then operates to reduce the special profits of the innovators to conform with the general, average rate of profits in the economic system. The result is that the consumers get progressively improved products at prices corresponding to progressively falling costs of production.
Yeah, so more free market stuff. I'm too tired, so I'm going to stop here. End of stream. Later, guys. So, next time I stream, I'll be able to finish the book.